Welcome to Chapter by Chapter. I'm your host, Brian Thomas Kropp, and I believe that stories have a tremendous power for good, and so I write them, and I enjoy sharing them with you. And if you are new to the show, welcome. One of the things that I enjoy most is connecting with other people. Even as an introvert, I enjoy connecting with other people. That's sort of why, it's not the whole reason why I write stories, but it's certainly a part of the deal is you want to make a connection with somebody. So I'm glad that you are here. The way the show goes is I'll read a chapter from one of the books that I have written. Right now we're in a book called Shell Game, which is a crime noir. And we're 12 chapters in, so you're still kind of early in, so you're in a good place. And then on the other side of that chapter, we'll do some behind the scenes of either how that chapter was written, some Easter eggs in that chapter, or just how books get written generally. So I'm glad you are here for the ride. We are getting into chapter 12 of Shell Game, and where we are in the story so far is our main character. His name is Evan Gold, and he's a private detective in a small town in Kansas. And he's got a lot going on, but in a nutshell, here's where we are. He and his partner were hired by a lady, arguably to find her missing father. While Evan's partner was out trying to figure that out, he got killed. And so Evan is now on a quest to figure out who killed his partner. There was another murder in town that night, and in both cases, the police think that Evan is at the center of those murders. And so he's also sort of fighting for his life to find who really did those murders. In other news, his marriage is going south, and he and his wife worked out a deal. If he can shut down the detective business in a week, then they might have a chance at saving their marriage. We're one day down, so now we're down to 6 days, and he still is no closer to figuring out how to do that. He also discovered a pearl pendant in some stuff that he bought from a flea market. You can listen to the chapter from last week. The pearl has some mystical, magical properties that will only get more developed over the course of time with the story. But he's just dealt with that. And now he is trying to make contact with this lady who hired him and his partner yesterday, because arguably she might be the last person that would know how his partner got shot and killed. So he needs to find out some information from her. So we're about to knock on her door and find out a little bit more of her story right after we hear from this week's sponsors. Chapter 12. Evan stepped up to the bank of apartment buzzers at the front door of the Walnut Grove Apartments and double-checked the apartment before pressing the button. Sure enough, Wolf was the name above the buzzer. "Who is it?" came a woman's voice over the tiny speaker. "Evan Gold, Miss Wolf." A moment later, Evan heard a short buzz and the lock on the front door release. He went inside and headed up the flight of stairs to Molly's apartment door. He rapped his knuckles on the door, and a moment later, the door opened to reveal his client. Molly wore a butter yellow quilted satin dressing gown. Evan thought it looked very sophisticated for a place like the Walnut Grove, with its velvet rose applique running from her left shoulder and underneath the tied belt. Molly's hair was in tight curls that bobbed along her collarbone. Her eyes were red and puffy, presumably from distress, and her forehead was in a constant pucker. But Evan couldn't help feeling like this was all for show. The hair, the tears. Something was off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. "Oh, Evan," she cried as soon as she laid her eyes on him. She embraced him, throwing both of her arms around his neck, burying her face in the shoulder of his jacket. Evan placed his hands on her shoulders. He felt the warmth of her frame against his and could feel her muscles tremble and quake beneath his hands. "I'm so glad you're here," she said. "I've been so scared. I had to get out of there. I had to," she whimpered quietly. Evan pushed her gently away, holding her by the arms. "That's all right," he said. "Why don't you let me inside and we can talk a bit?" She nodded and let Evan in. As soon as the door clicked closed, she said, "Evan, I need to confess something. I feel so stupid. I got myself all mixed up, and now..." Her voice trailed off. "Slow down," Evan soothed. "Take a breath and let it out. I'm told confession is good medicine." Evan wiped away the tears from her cheek. "I'm afraid a lot of what I told you yesterday was a lie. And now your partner is dead, and Jason, and..." Her tears started anew and cut off the air to her throat. Evan's face broke into a smile. He waved his hat at her before tossing it on the table. "I wouldn't worry about all that. We didn't believe you anyway." Molly looked at Evan with unblinking eyes. "However, the money you flashed around and that promise of more where that came from, well, that was quite convincing." Evan put his hands on his hips and allowed himself to take in the place. "My money?" She looked confused. "You paid us much better than if you had been telling the truth," Evan chuckled to himself. "The sob story you fed us at the office. Poor girl, sent like a dove from the ark looking for a prodigal pa, wouldn't have been carrying the roll of cabbage you had in your purse. Let's just say it raised our interest just enough to play along. Everyone's got to eat, isn't that right?" He looked at her with a devilish arch in his eyebrows. "Yes, well," she started, seemingly at a loss for how to feel about such a comment. "I think you can then appreciate that my situation has shifted a bit." Evan cut her off. Holding his hand up to her, he said, "We'll get to that in time. I'm just as curious as the next person about your shifting situation, as you call it. However, I would like to know who it is I'm talking to. It makes the formalities of personal address much easier." "What?" Molly asked. Evan sat in an armchair and rested his hat on his knee. "Yesterday, you came into my office saying your name was Milly Brandt. This morning, you call my office saying your name is Wolf. Now, I don't much care what name you want to go by, but it would help me out not to keep a list of aliases for my clients at the ready. So what will it be? Brandt? Wolf? Or is there something else you'd like to pull out of the hopper?" She looked at the ground and wrung her hands. "Porter," she said softly. "My name is Claire Porter. I didn't want to tell you my real name yesterday because," again, Evan held up his hand to silence her. Claire complied. "Now here's what I know." Evan began to talk as if telling a fantastical story from long ago to a group of wide-eyed listeners. "There were 2 murders last night. My partner and Mr. Charles. That would be bad enough, but 2 murders in one night, you can imagine, in a small town like Athens, the police are a bit anxious and asking some questions. Specifically, they're asking me some questions, and I don't like the conclusions they're coming to. They seem to think I'm a link between the 2 murders, but I know better. I know that you are a link between the 2, so I'd like to ask you a few questions if you don't mind." Claire flung herself on her knees next to Evan and grasped her hand. "You don't think I had something to do with the murders, do you?" "Did you?" Evan asked. "Have something to do with the murders, I mean." Claire shook her head. "Well, there you go. You said yourself Charles was a dangerous character. Dangerous characters often come to dangerous ends. It's unfortunate what happened to Gabe, but we all know there are risks in this line of work." Claire began her sobs anew. "Seeing Mr. Silver's face on the morning paper just made me sick. He seemed so alive yesterday at your office. He seemed like he was there, very solidly alive. Then to read that he had a wife and kids..." Her voice broke down again. She buried her face in her hands. "Like I said," Evan said, "Gabe Silver was a grown man able to make his own choices. He chose this occupation and his wife went along with him. It's a tragedy for sure, but it all comes with the territory." Evan stood and went to a table near the outside window. He watched for a moment as the misty swirls of fog drifted lazily down Copley Street. There was a pitcher of water on the table and 2 clean glasses. He poured a glass for Claire. "You should drink this," he said. "All that crying's going to leave you depleted if you don't drink some water." She took the glass and sipped it. Claire continued to sit on the floor, her legs tucked under her like a child sitting in a schoolroom. Evan paced the small apartment. "I'd like us to refocus on the important matters at hand," Evan said in a clear voice. "There are 2 dead men, and the police want to find the killer. The faster the better from their angle. Now, I wasn't there, which is good for us. I'll be able to hold off the police for a while. But I know these guys. There's blood in the water, and if we don't give them a good story soon, they're going to ask better and better questions. Then we might discover ourselves in hot water whether we like it or not." Suddenly, Claire perked up. "Do they know about me?" Evan chuckled. You see? Now that's what I mean. No, they don't. Not yet, anyway. All the police know is that Gabe was looking for a client's missing father. But sooner or later, they're going to want to know the name of that client, and if you don't shoot straight with me, you or I are going to take a trip to Leavenworth. What would the police think of me if they found out I hired you under a false name? Claire asked. I can't say that helps you out, Miss Porter, Evan said. Claire, please, she said. I can't handle the formality between us. Fine. Claire it is, Evan said. Now, I think I can spin a story to feed the police to keep them off our case for a while we sort some other details out. You're going to lie to the police? Claire asked. No, Evan said. Lies are too hard to keep up with. Much better to tell the truth. But I'm not going to tell them everything either. From what I can see, the whole truth, or at least what little of it that I know, hurts me more than it helps me. I need to keep the police distracted until truth and reality line up. But if your real concern is if I can keep them away from you, I think I can work that out. At least for a while. Thank you, Claire said through a weak smile. Evan began to pace the floor again. He kept his arms crossed in front of him and looked at his shoes as he walked. Now, what exactly do we tell the police? For that matter, Claire said, pushing herself up from the floor to sit in the armchair, do the police ever need to know about me? Evan sucked his teeth as he thought a moment. That remains to be seen, he said. But I'll need to know the real story so I can figure out what to do next. Claire began to massage her handkerchief between her fingers. She looked at her hands for a long time before standing suddenly and walking to the window. Evan watched all of this with a dry smile on his face. I haven't lived a good life, Claire said. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. I can't tell you how afraid I am, Evan. She turned to look at Evan. Her eyes were wet with new tears. She walked to him and said, I need you. I'm so afraid. I'm so tired, so frail. She placed her hands on his biceps. I need your strength to hold me up. Evan looked deep into her eyes before breaking out into a sardonic laugh. I've got to hand it to you. You have style. You may be a lot of things, but frail is not one of them, he laughed again. Don't laugh at me, Claire said, visibly hurt. Listen, I don't know what other chumps you've handled in the past, but I've seen a lot of master manipulators in my time, and I'm sorry, but your act won't impress me. Act? She said, and then, I guess I deserve that. She walked back to the window. I still would like your help, though. Let's start with what happened last night, Evan said. So it's chapters like this one. If you are a long-time listener of this show, then you are, I don't know how aware, but somewhat aware that this book I think I was on draft 3 before I sent it off to some friends to read it and give me their honest feedback on it. And it was not till then that I realized, there are problems. And one of the issues we've already talked about is, but it's sort of related, how he was talking with his wife. They just seemed very cold, and it didn't really work. Nobody was rooting for Evan and Catherine to get back together. And so we need to figure out how to make Evan a little more of a sympathetic hero if we're going to drive the whole story off of him. The mistake was I was getting my character of Evan from a lot of hard-boiled detectives from my past, and they were very hard, cold people, and that is not what people like you wanted out of this hero. But the other issue was he's a married guy. And what do we do with this person we now know as Claire Porter? She was Milly Brandt for half a minute. She was Molly Wolfe, and now we know her as Claire Porter. And thankfully, this is the last time her name changes. So she's officially Claire Porter. But she is a manipulative person, and we've already sort of seen that. We'll just see more of it when she hired Evan and Gabe to look for her father. She was already kind of laying it on thick. But this just ramps it up to a whole other level. And in these first drafts, he kind of plays along with it. He plays along with it to kind of help draw her out. He never gives into temptation. He never crosses any lines because he is still a married guy with a level of honor. But he does, in order to keep her interested in the case, and while he's trying to solve things, he acts a little more romantically than a lot of people felt comfortable with, which I can completely understand. So had to dial that back a lot. And while she is still highly manipulative and using, batting her eyes and playing the cute, helpless victim and all that kind of stuff in order to draw Evan's heart to her, he is not going to have anything to do with that. But that was a long series of revisions that I went through with this story to kind of help. How do I maintain a hero of honor and some level of integrity while he's trying to deal with people who are less than upfront with what's going on and trying to get to the bottom? So what we're going to discover is, if you haven't already read the book, it's a crime noir. We're going to find out that Claire is tied up with a bunch of other liars. And so, how do you help get truth out of liars while also remaining honest and integritable was kind of an interesting needle to thread. So there were some revisions and delays and that kind of stuff to get this book finished, but that was good. The other thing that I sort of wanted to highlight, this is, I guess, an Easter egg of sorts. So my father passed away when I was 18, and one piece of advice that my mom and I got as we were kind of early stages in the grieving process, people are coming over to the house is full of Kleenex, we're crying a lot, it's very sad, and some very practically minded, very helpful person commented that we needed to make sure that we were drinking lots of water because we were losing a lot of water through our face. Like all the tears, we were losing water. And so we needed to stay hydrated. I don't know why, of all the things that happened during that week of, when he passed away to when the funeral was, there are a lot of memories I have of that. But for some strange reason, one of them is if you're grieving or crying a lot, you should make sure that you're still drinking a lot of water. Otherwise, you'll get dehydrated, and that's not helpful. It seems very practical, seems very pragmatic, but for some reason, I've always appreciated that little piece of advice. And now that I am a pastor or of sorts at a church, of sorts, that sounds like it's some kind of weird thing. I'm not the pastor. I am one of the pastors. I'm an associate pastor. But you deal with both sides of life a lot, of the joy of finding out that a new baby is on the way or a new baby has been born. That's very exciting. You also do a lot of hand-holding with those who have lost loved ones. And there's a part of that where your heart goes out to them and you just want to hug them. And then there are some practical things that are helpful, as sadly, death is a part of a thing that we experience in life. And so how do you do that well? And sometimes seemingly silly things like make sure you drink a lot of water is actually very helpful. So there you go. If you're going through a particularly rough patch and you find yourself crying a lot, make sure you're also drinking water. That is helpful. So we're going to get into a little bit more about what the honest story, or at least an honester story, about what Claire really is doing in town in chapter 13, which will be coming out next week. Between now and then, what I hope is that you will tell friends about the podcast, tell friends about the book. You can go to brianthomascrop.com and read the entire book for free. It's over there on the blog, and you can just read it. Love to know what your thoughts on that are. You can also go to Amazon.com and purchase a copy or give a copy away. That would also be appreciated. In all the places, if you could leave ratings and reviews, that will also be helpful. I keep forgetting to mention this, but it is also true. This podcast, I'm also throwing out on YouTube. So if you or you know somebody who listening or watching podcasts on YouTube, then you can check out that stuff over there on my YouTube channel. So I think those are all of the things. Oh, my newsletter. Because everybody needs a new newsletter. Everybody needs a new email in their inbox. But if you would like another one, swing over to brianthomascropp.com, sign up for my reader group. I would enjoy getting to know you just a little bit better. I've got some freebies to send you if you sign up. But you also get to know a little bit more about me and my family, and on your end, new releases and how to participate in getting these books out into the world. You can find all that out in that reader group. So check that out over at brianthomascropp.com. Well, it is summer, and so I hope you are experiencing a little bit of a change of pace, a little bit of refreshment as the weather heats up, at least in North America. The weather is heating up, so I hope you're having a good summer. We will be back next week, as I said, with Chapter 13 of Shell Game, and I hope between now and then you have a great week. We'll see you back here next time.